This is a 12-mark question. Again, it's an old style one, so it isn't worded quite as yours would be. It says, using an aggregate demand and aggregate supply diagram, evaluate the effect on output of the 500,000 public sector job cuts, and they refer you to the extract. The reason it's particularly different is because it says evaluate. Your exam will only say evaluate when it's for your essay question, so 20 marks for AS and 25 marks for the essay when you're doing your A-level exams at the end of the 2 years. But apart from that, we know that we need evaluation. So in your exam, it would instead say discuss or examine or assess. Those are the words that you would have in a question like this, but let's imagine it says one of those. And you have to have an aggregate demand and aggregate supply diagram. We've established, obviously, we need to have evaluation in your answer. It's for 12 marks altogether. So just to explain what's going to happen, if you look at extract 1, line 12, it just says job losses there will be amounting to probably about 500,000 out of a public sector workforce of about 6 million by the end of 2014. And the impact that it's going to have on aggregate supply, aggregate demand diagram. Remember, it's theme 2. You need 2 labels here. Price level. You need 2 labels here. Real output. 2 here. Aggregate demand. 2 here. Aggregate supply. And that's long run aggregate supply. And remember to put in your equilibriums with your ruler. It all needs to be done with a ruler. Y for income, let's imagine that's a straight line there, P. And the impact of this, when we have the 500,000 public sector job cuts, that means that we're going to have an increase in unemployment if everything else stays the same, so ceteris paribus. If we have an increase in unemployment, that means that consumption is going to go down. And if people are consuming a lot, it's also likely that investment by firms will go down because it won't be worth their while to invest. We know that aggregate demand is consumption plus investment plus government spending plus exports minus imports, net exports. So therefore, if consumption goes down, investment goes down, ceteris paribus, the rest staying the same, aggregate demand will go down. And you know that if that happens, aggregate demand needs to shift to the left and label that nice and clearly AD1, and then put in your new equilibrium, Y1, and then we can answer this question because the question said evaluate the effect on output. They want to know what's happened to output. Be careful that you keep checking back to the question for exactly what they want, and you can say that output has fallen from Y to Y1, and you will explain why that is. You'll say because of the consumption going down, investment going down. You need to explain that it's because there's more people unemployed, they have less income, therefore they can't afford to buy as many things, consumption goes down. You need to have the chains of reasoning and you need to explain yourself. So with things like because, so, therefore. The next thing, because it says to evaluate, you need to talk about the other side. So I'll do this in green. Or you need to talk about why this might not happen, what the actual impact might be, things like that, looking at the bigger picture. And one thing to say is that the effect might actually not just be this fall in output, it might actually be more because of the multiplier effect. So, multiplier effect. And that will mean that the fall in output will be even further, because remember the multiplier would cause AD to shift a tiny bit further to the left as well. So you can say that the fall in output might be even greater. Another thing that you could say is that actually, because unemployment goes up so significantly, some of those people will now be claiming job seekers allowance. And job seekers allowance is part of government spending, and therefore actually government spending might go up a little bit. So that would pull this line back. So AD will come to here, but then it will come back again a little bit. And that, remember, is called an automatic stabilizer effect. So the automatic stabilizer effect means that government spending goes up a little bit because of job seekers allowance payments going up, because unemployment has gone up. And so rather than shifting over here and staying over here, it will actually shift back slightly. Now when you're talking, if you talk about the multiplier effect or the automatic stabilizer effect, I would say don't draw it on the diagram because it will confuse the diagram, unless the question's specifically about that, but you can just explain it in your own words. Another thing to question is, although it's an enormous number of job cuts, it's 500,000 people, you can ask, were they working full-time or were they working part-time? If it was people who were working part-time, a lot of them, then actually the fall in consumption won't be as significant as if before those people had a full-time job. So that would be something to consider. Also, you can question how much were they paid. If they were on higher salaries, then the fall in consumption will be greater than if these people were on lower salaries. You can also question whether they'll get a new job easily. Do they have transferable skills? If they can easily get a new job, then the fall in consumption, again, and investment won't be as significant. The final thing to consider, did something else in aggregate demand actually go up at the same time? So in this extract, they were actually talking about cuts in government spending, so that's not really so relevant. But maybe at the same time, the amount of people who are